Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the basics of planting a clover trail. And we'll go over a few things as it relates to that. The first, we'll go over how we chose the location for this clover trail. Next, we'll talk about some of the things that you kind of want to watch out for before actually planting the clover trail. And then finally, we'll talk about a few different ways that you can plant these things. We'll talk about how we planted this trail last year, and we actually extended it about 100 yards towards a food plot. And we'll also go over our planting method that we used this year. So the first thing that we had to do was figure out where we wanted to put this clover trail. And really, it's not much different than putting in a food plot. And on our property, most of our food is located on the north half of our property. And so that's where we wanted to have these clover trails, is also on the north half of the property. And the reason for that is we wanted to have a lot of the deer movement moving from the south end of our property towards like the bedding locations towards the north end of our property. That way they're away from neighboring hunting pressure, and they're also getting sent off to a destination food source, again, where there isn't a lot of hunting pressure. So that's kind of the rationale behind why we chose the north half of our property for a majority of the food. And the clover trails were no exception. We wanted those on the north half of the property. And so another thing that we wanted to do was connect several different food sources and several different bedding areas together to kind of move those deer from plot to plot and eventually put them off into the destination food source. So what this clover trail is doing is it's running north to south, connecting several different food plots and several different bedding areas. So these deer can exit the bedding areas, hit a food plot, continue down the clover trail, hit another food plot, and make their way all the way to the destination food source. So these clover trails turn into deer trails, but they're also food plots. So they're food plot trails, they're also deer trails. They're our way of kind of encouraging deer movement from one area of our property to the next. And it turns into very predictable deer movement, especially for doe families. And another thing that we want to consider when we're making these clover trails is we don't want to make them too wide that the deer don't feel comfortable moving through them during daylight, especially those mature bucks. Now I will say for mature bucks, sometimes even this clover trail is a little bit too wide open for those guys during daylight, and what they'll want to do is they'll want to take a sneak trail on the downwind side of the food plot. If they know those doe family groups are using this trail and they don't want to expose themselves, they're going to take a sneak trail about 15 to 20 yards on the other side of this cover, again on the downwind side of this clover trail, and kind of just skirt the edge of it. And so if you can get a shot at that sneak trail along with this clover trail, it makes for a really good setup in the fall. So this particular clover trail right here is about 400 yards long, and I think at the widest point it's maybe 8 feet, and at the narrowest point it's probably 4 feet. So it's not very wide. And again, that gives those deer that feeling of security that they need to move during daylight. So when determining the width of your trail, one of the guides that I kind of use is I just want to make sure that I'm able to get up and down this trail with my ATV or with my riding lawnmower. And that's really just for maintenance purposes. So next summer, if I ever need to come in here and spray the broadleaf weeds or remove any grasses with herbicides, I'm able to do that pretty easily with my ATV. And also I want to make sure I can get my riding lawnmower back here, so when the clover does start to mature and start flowering, I'm able to come back here and cut it back. So another thing that you want to make sure you're watching out for, because you are making these clover trails more on the narrow side, more narrow than you would a typical food plot, you have to make sure that it's not being shaded out by the large canopy trees on your property. It does not take much to shade out a food plot, so you're going to most likely have to remove a lot of trees or hinge cut them to the side to make sure that your food plot is exposed to a majority of the sky. And that was actually one thing that we did have to address this year when we extended the trail, both north and south, is we had to hinge cut a lot of trees away from the trail to make sure that it was getting adequate sunlight. And finally, when it comes to actually planting these clover trails, it is no different than planting a food plot. We used 2 different planting methods for this particular trail. Last year all I did is I sprayed this trail multiple times with glyphosate and 2,4-D throughout the summer. I killed all the vegetation. And then before a rain in August, I broadcast ladino clover up and down the trail. I did go a little heavy. About a month later, I went over top of it with cereal rye. And then in the spring, I came through and I mowed the cereal rye down with my lawnmower. And this is what I was left with. It's a pretty pure stand of ladino clover, and I'm very happy with it. I could have used the same planting method this year, but I like to experiment. I wanted to see if there's one way that's better than the other. So what I did this year is I took my ATV, I lightly disked the ground, then I took a harrow drag and I smoothed everything out. Then I used a lawn roller, I packed everything down, and then I broadcast ladino clover along with Dutch clover up and down the path. And then I went over it one more time with the lawn roller just to pack everything in. So it's been about a month since we planted and it's looking really good. It doesn't look nearly as good as this, obviously, because this is a year old and the other part of the trail is only about a month old. But so far, I'm very impressed. And I'll do a follow-up video next year sometime in the late spring just to see if I can notice a difference between the two different planting methods, if one looks thicker than the other. The really nice thing about these clover trails, guys, is they're easy to install, they're low maintenance, and you can really move deer from one area of your property to the other as they graze down the trail. Deer don't like to sit in one place and eat in one place all night. They want to be moving. And this type of a trail gives them that. They can graze on the clover and browse on everything all the way down this trail and throughout your property. So if you don't have one of these on your property, I would consider putting one in. If you guys do have any questions on how to plant a clover trail, please leave them in the comment section below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can, but we will see you guys in the next video.